You know how sometimes you hear a number that just stops you in your tracks?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about wealth today, specifically billionaire wealth. And honestly, the numbers from our sources are, well, they're truly eye-popping.
Yeah.
So today we're taking a deep dive into this recent surge in these huge fortunes. We'll look at the latest data and, really crucially, try to uncover where this wealth is actually coming from,
Well,
and its impact globally.
exactly. And this isn't just about big flashy numbers. It's more about understanding the um, the underlying dynamics that are actively reshaping our economies and societies right now.
Right.
We're going to explore not just how this wealth gets amassed, but also its specific implications for regions like the Global South. And importantly, what our main source suggests are the sort of systemic issues driving all this.
And our primary source for this deep dive is a really revealing report from Oxfam GB. It's got a provocative title. Billionaire wealth surges 3 times faster in 2024. World now on track for at least 5 trillionaires within a decade. Yeah. It's packed with surprising facts, and it really does challenge some common ideas about, how wealth gets created.
So our mission today is really to distill the most important nuggets from this material for you. We want to help you grasp the sheer scale of what's happening, understand its historical echoes and ongoing connections, and ultimately sort of figure out what it all means for the bigger picture, prosperity versus inequality.
Okay, so let's just jump right in then. The headline figures from this Oxfam report are, frankly, pretty astonishing.
They really are.
Global billionaire wealth grew by an astounding $2 trillion in 2024 alone.
2 trillion.
In 1 year. That's apparently 3 times faster than the previous year.
Yeah.
And to put that in perspective, that's roughly $5.7 billion a day.
Just let that sink in.
Yeah.
5.7 billion every single day.
Yeah.
And what's truly striking, building on that, is the projection that comes from this rapid acceleration. The report indicates the world is now on track to see at least 5 trillionaires.
Trillionaires, not billionaires.
Trillionaires, yeah, within a decade. And it notes this kind of rapid increase, this surge, is the second largest annual one since records began. The largest was actually in 2021, right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Huh. Interesting timing.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What conditions allow for that kind of explosive growth?
And it creates such a stark contrast when you put it against the state of global poverty.
Mm.
The report highlights the number of people living in poverty, around 3.5 billion.
Yeah.
That number has barely changed since 1990, according to the World Bank data they cite.
Mm-hmm.
So progress on reducing poverty has basically slowed to a standstill.
Stagnated.
Exactly. And the World Bank even warns that extreme poverty could be ended 3 times faster if inequality were reduced. So while some fortunes are just rocketing up, others are literally stuck. Billions of people.
And the number of billionaires themselves has also shot up significantly, rose to 2,769 in 2024, up from 2,565 just the year before.
Right.
And their combined wealth surged from $13 trillion to $15 trillion in just 12 months.
$15 trillion.
Even more striking, maybe, is the wealth of the world's 10 richest men. It grew, on average, by almost $100 million a day.
$100 million a day.
Yeah.
For 10 guys.
Yeah, think about that. I mean, that's almost unimaginable wealth accumulating daily.
The report even gives a local analogy for the UK, which is kind of interesting. It notes that UK billionaires' collective wealth went up by 35 million. That's about $44 million a day.
Wow.
Reaching a total of 182 billion, or roughly $231 billion. They tried to visualize it, saying it's enough to cover the city of Manchester in 10-pound notes almost 1.5 times over.
Huh? That's visual.
And 4 new billionaires were created in the UK last year alone, bringing their total to 57. But I guess the real question, the big one, is how? How is this enormous wealth actually being generated? Is it all just, hard work and brilliant innovation?
Well, that's precisely the important question in the Oxfam report, which they provocatively titled Takers Not Makers. That's what it sets out to answer. It directly challenges that popular idea that billionaire wealth is purely the result of individual genius or merit. The whole invent something amazing, build a company from scratch narrative.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because the report's analysis goes deeper into the origins of this wealth, and it paints quite a different picture.
Mm-hmm.
Oxfam's findings suggest that a significant chunk, 60% of billionaire wealth globally, now comes from inheritance, or monopoly power, or what they term crony connections.
Crony connections.
Yeah, basically close ties between the richest people and governments.
Yeah.
So it suggests it's not just about what you invent or build, it's also heavily about how the system itself is structured.
And breaking that 60% down further, the report specifies that 36% more than a third of global billionaire wealth is inherited.
Just passed down.
Just passed down generations, yeah, not created by the current billionaire. Then another 18% stems from what they define as monopoly power, essentially dominating a market so much that competition is squeezed out. Right. And a final 6% is attributed to those crony connections, highlighting the role of, let's say, privileged relationships in building fortunes. It implies that for every dollar earned through pure innovation, maybe almost 2 more come from inherited privilege or market dominance or connections.
So, using the UK as an example again, the report states that 37% of billionaire wealth there comes from cronyism.
37%.
Yeah, and 15% from monopolies. And apparently these are actually the highest proportions among all the G7 countries.
Really? Highest in the G7.
Yeah, and another 7% of UK billionaire wealth is from inheritance. So added up, it really seems to suggest a pattern, doesn't it? Wealth accumulation that isn't purely about, market-driven innovation, but might be more rooted in systemic advantages and who you know.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the report frames this accumulation of what it calls unmerited wealth through the lens of colonialism. Now, just to be clear, when the report talks about the global south, it's generally referring to low and middle income countries, across Africa, Asia, Latin America.
Right, compared to the global north.
Exactly.
Right.
Which is generally wealthier, industrialized nations like the US, UK, most of Europe. And Oxfam presents colonialism not just as something from history books, but as a powerful and ongoing force behind today's extreme inequality. It highlights how huge sums of money apparently still flow from the global south to countries in the global north and their richest citizens.
And they describe that flow as a form of modern-day colonialism. That's a strong claim.
It is a strong claim, and the report argues it's not just history, it's a living, active dynamic happening right now through the financial system.
And the sheer volume they claim is flowing is, well, it's staggering. The report states that the richest 1% in global north countries, think US, UK, France, extracted an astonishing $30 million an hour from the global south through the financial system in 2023.
30 million every hour?
Every single hour. It's hard to even comprehend that level of wealth transfer. How does Oxfam back up such a strong framing like modern-day colonialism?
Well, they point to tracing these financial flows and the resulting imbalances. For instance, despite making up only about 21% of the global population, global north countries control 69% of global wealth.
Wow.
0.77% of all billionaire wealth, and they're home to 68% of all billionaires. So it illustrates this stark, deeply imbalanced concentration of wealth globally.
A tiny fraction of the population holding most of the assets.
Exactly. And the report asserts this imbalance is perpetuated by financial systems, debt structures, trade rules that tend to favor the global north.
And the impact of this claimed financial flow on the global south is described as profound, right? I mean, imagine trying to build anything if half your income is gone before you even start.
That's the analogy, yeah. Oxfam suggests many of these low and middle income countries face that kind of impossible situation. On average, they say these countries spend nearly half their national budgets just on debt repayments and interest.
Half their budget.
Nearly half, often to rich creditors based in places like London and New York. And this amount far outstrips what they manage to invest, combined in crucial things like education and healthcare for their own people.
So the money's flowing out as debt payments instead of staying in for development.
That's the argument. And the UK, in particular, is singled out as holding what the report calls a special responsibility.
Why specifically the UK?
Because apparently around 90% of the debt contracts for low-income countries are governed by UK law, often originating in London's financial center. And the historical data they present is striking too. Between 1970 and 2023, global South governments collectively paid something like $3.3 trillion in interest alone to northern creditors.
Trillions in interest.
Yeah. So the report frames it not just as a recent issue, but a long-standing pattern of financial extraction that, they argue, continues today.
And this isn't just abstract finance, right?
Yeah.
It has real human costs.
Absolutely. The report connects these financial dynamics to tangible human outcomes. It notes, for example, that the average life expectancy for Africans is still more than 15 years shorter than for Europeans.
15 years.
And furthermore, research cited in the report shows that wages in the global south are dramatically lower, somewhere between 87 and 95% lower than wages in the global north for work requiring equal skills.
So it's not about the work itself, but where you do it.
That's the implication. The value placed on that labor seems geographically determined, according to this research. And one final statistic on that. Despite contributing, they estimate 90% of the labor that actually drives the global economy.
90%.
Workers in these low and middle income countries receive only 21% of global income. So it paints a very clear picture from Oxfam's perspective of how wealth is generated in one place through labor, but then extracted and concentrated elsewhere. A fundamental disconnect, they argue, rooted in these historical and ongoing imbalances.
Okay, so given this really stark picture of extreme wealth concentration, the claims about its roots, and these profound global impacts, especially on the global south, what does the Oxfam report actually propose? What solutions do they put forward?
Well, the report doesn't just diagnose the problem, it does call very strongly on all governments, including the UK's, to act urgently to reduce inequality and what it calls extreme wealth. It outlines several key commitments they believe are necessary.
Okay, like what?
First, they advocate for radically reducing inequality. They set a target, ensuring the incomes of the top 10% are no higher than the bottom 40%.
Globally and nationally.
Both globally and at a national level, yes. That would obviously be a massive structural shift in how income is distributed.
Okay, what else?
Second, probably unsurprisingly, they propose taxing the richest much more effectively to, as they put it, end extreme wealth.
How?
This includes things like establishing global tax policy under a new UN tax convention, making sure the wealthiest individuals and corporations actually pay their fair share, and fundamentally getting rid of tax havens that allow wealth to be hidden and go untaxed.
So a global overhaul of the tax system, essentially.
That's what they're calling for, yeah. A direct challenge to the current framework.
And finally, what about that flow of wealth from south to north they highlighted?
Right. To address that directly, they call for debt cancellation for low and middle income countries.
Just wipe the slate clean.
That's the call, yes. And also ending the dominance they see rich countries and corporations having over financial markets and international trade rules. And beyond the financial mechanics, they also suggest that former colonial powers, explicitly including the UK, must confront the lasting harm caused by their colonial rule. This includes offering formal apologies and providing reparations to the affected communities.
Reparations, that's obviously a very significant and complex proposal.
Extremely complex, yes. But it's part of their comprehensive set of recommendations aimed at tackling inequality at its roots, both economic and historical.
So this deep dive, drawing heavily on the Oxfam report, really reveals what they present as a truly interconnected system. Extreme wealth accumulation often having roots, they argue, not just in innovation, but significantly in inheritance, monopolies, cronyism, and where the historical dynamics of colonialism continue to play out, allegedly, in modern financial flows, particularly impacting the global south. It's painted as this complex web tying past injustices to present economic realities.
Yeah, and what's compelling, I think, is that the report doesn't just leave you with the problem, however starkly they present it. It clearly outlines concrete steps, controversial or not, that it believes governments can take to reshape this global economic landscape towards, greater fairness. It provides a kind of roadmap for the change they advocate.
So, thinking about all this,
Yeah.
what does it mean for you listening? Maybe next time you read about record corporate profits or another billionaire's fortune growing, just pause and consider maybe the sources of that wealth. How might they connect, if at all, to these larger global patterns the report talks about?
It might make you look at the financial news or economic discussions just a little differently.
Yeah.
And it really raises a fundamental question for reflection, doesn't it? If the world truly is on track for trillionaires, as the report projects, while billions remain trapped in poverty, what responsibility do we, perhaps, as global citizens, have to question the systems that allow such extremes to coexist and potentially grow?
A truly provocative thought to mull over, don't you think? We certainly hope this deep dive has given you something of a shortcut to understanding this very complex and often contentious issue. Until next time.